but now it's my pleasure to introduce Michael Jamieson. Michael's the Program Director of Native Afforestation Te Rākau. And here we go. Te Rākau, New Zealand's Forest Service, is a supporting sponsor of this conference. Their work supports forestry priorities such as climate change, the ETS, native planting and 1 billion trees. We thank them for their generous support and for Michael's attendance today. Thanks, Michael. There's more to say, but Michael did say to me, it's very long, please don't say all of it, so I'm going to say all of it. Michael has worked internationally for 20 years and has a background in corporate leadership for Nike, Icebreaker, Energy Eggs, among others. He also has a strong public service experience providing leadership to MPI in policy and trade and representing in New Zealand at the G20 and APEC Forum, and delivered MB, Māori Economic Development Programs, and the SME scale-ups with ME. That sounds impressive. I don't necessarily know exactly what that is, but is it impressive? Yes. Yeah. Is it impressive, you guys? They're impressed. Great. Michael has served as a National Trustee for the New Zealand Farm Environment Trust and is currently a Trustee for Hau Ariki Marae in his hometown of Martinborough. We welcome Michael here today. Can't wait to hear what you've got to say. Coming up, Michael, the floor is yours.
Oh, kia ora koutou. So I'm Michael Jamieson. I haven't spoken in front of a large crowd since, who knows when with COVID. It's been such a funny time. I'm used to looking at a Teams call. So it's quite unusual being up here, but thank you for having me. And the other thing is, I've got to say, what a day in terms of expertise and speakers, but as much as anything, the audience has been really impressive. The questions, the knowledge about your sector, your understanding of the issues, your engagement, I think has been fantastic. So for me, sitting there listening to this, it's been quite, wow, what a crowd. But also, what the hell am I going to say that's going to be useful? So I want to talk about the program for native afforestation. It's been out there now for a little bit in terms of the budget announcement, and we're starting to stand that program up. So I want to talk about what it is and what it isn't today, and how it's structured, what our work streams are, and what we're looking to do. Does that sound fair? Cool. So the first thing is native trees. Native trees hold a special place for New Zealand. Obviously, they have a real link to the country, to the culture of the country. We also think they're fantastic for carbon. The long-term native trees role as a sink, a carbon sink, being something that you don't meddle with too much over time, is something that's been pretty attractive. And certainly the Climate Change Commission, which has put together a pathway, if you like, suggests that we might have up to 300,000 hectares of new native plantings over the next number of years, which is pretty significant. So that's sort of at a rate of around 25,000 hectares a year for 12 years gets us to that level. Obviously ramping up to that from where we are today is a big change. Most of the work that I've done in corporates has been around scale and scaling up businesses. So I've been lucky enough to work in that space at Lion, at Nike globally, and then also with Icebreaker to help them change their business and course of business. It taught me quite a lot about how scale works and how scale-ups work in business. And then I switched careers into government, and I've been working in that space on export growth and other bits and pieces. But I've sort of developed that interface between the private sector and the public sector, and I think I can play that role in this scale-up. So in terms of natives, we see up there long-term sinks, a big increase expected or anticipated potentially, and what we're going to do with this program is invest in reducing the barriers to planting natives. Now alongside of that comes the incentive side to plant natives, but fundamentally there's a number of real barriers with planting native trees at the moment, which you'll all be familiar with, given the rates of afforestation of native forests and trees planted at the moment. So to jump into it, if I can, as to what it is and what it isn't. As I've been around the traps, getting myself up to speed a little bit with the sector in the last couple of months and visiting some nurseries, I've heard a lot about 1BT, and I think it's really important to talk about what this program is. It's an opportunity to collaborate and bring in a lot of diverse skill sets to try and solve some problems which are actually quite hard to solve. I think they're harder to solve than the government will solve, they're harder to solve than the private sector will solve, they're harder to solve than the science will solve, but we need to bring all those things in together and create something that knocks our way through these challenges. And we'll talk about those barriers very soon. It's about some incentive, obviously, and increasing the demand and removing some of those barriers, as I talked about. And one of those big barriers is cost of planting natives and producing natives. And what it is not, if I could just jump on that, is it's not the 1BT program. So that's not the focus of this program. So 1 billion trees, for those of you in the sector who were participating in that, was a program where we funded people to plant trees on land. I heard the policy and trade team suggest that if we went at the current cost rates of doing that, to plant this many trees, you know, we'd be in the multiple billions of dollars, and it wouldn't work. So that's been taken off the table at this point, and the focus is on getting the barriers to planting down and getting the incentives to planting in place. So the other thing that it isn't is it's not the whole answer. I'm sure that we'll get through this first tranche of work and then we'll figure out where we go from here. We might have to move a bit, might pivot a bit. Who knows? We might have different ministers, we may have different directions that come in. But what we're working on at the moment is a number of things which I'll talk about in the next couple of slides. So I just want to pause there for a minute. Does that make sense? Is there any questions or queries on that part of it? So the barriers that we've looked at, and we learnt a lot, I think, through the 1 Billion Trees program, are these sorts of things. And again, many of you will be familiar with these probably, but when we're talking about planting natives this time round, we're focusing on scale. So we're focusing on really big scale planting operations, which are different than what most native planting is today. In that 2019 survey that was done with NZPPI, we looked at the structure of the types of native plants that are produced in terms of what segments, etc. And most plants in that native category, as you all know, are sort of those riparian planting, beautification, roadside. So they're small, shrubs, grasses, trees, cabbage, etc., etc. And then in the trees category, it's largely manuka and kanuka. And as somebody pointed out on one of my trips to the nurseries, they're kind of the toothpicks of the carbon industry. So they're fast growing, but they don't have much girth. And in terms of carbon sequestration, they're probably not going to be the answer. Great cover and other things, but they're not the answer in terms of carbon sequestration. So the big boys, the big podocarps, are probably the ones that are going to do the big job in carbon. We know that that's not the whole answer. We know that there's a forestry system. But in terms of scale-up focus, we're probably going to focus on that segment initially, because if we don't have those big trees, we're never going to get close to the carbon targets that we're looking for. That also potentially leaves a lot of space for native nurseries to fill in the rest. So at the moment, the big trees, for example, 4%, according to that 2019 survey, of what's produced in nurseries. So they're very hard to do, they're very expensive. The planting rates and survivability is sometimes difficult. So solving some of those problems will probably be first kind of focus to get those kind of trees set up for scale. So it's a multi-year program. It's around sort of 4 years of work, which is lined up from a budget standpoint to try and crack this. And some of the key things we need to do, I'm going to talk about in this next part, which is our project work streams. Someone once told me, just before I jump into this, again, one of the good pieces of advice I have is we need three things. We need somewhere to plant them. We need something to plant. So somewhere, something, and someone to plant. And again, just talking with some people today, the actual planting side of things is a real constraint at the moment. So getting people to plant, the capacity is pretty full with exotics. But one of the things we've also learnt is that the commercial industry for exotics is a pretty good place for us to start comparing what happens in that industry versus what happens in the native industry. So we can understand how they have built a very successful market. Obviously, the trees are unique. When you look at, return and speed, it's very hard to beat a pine, which is why they're so prolific. There's a harvest market, there's a carbon market, there's a whole bunch of things that are easy to plant relatively. They're very, very good survivability and yields relatively. So they're very, it's a different kind of species, but there's lots of things about the way they've set that industry up that I think we can learn from to apply to the native side of things. And we see a lot of spillover from the research and science that we'll apply, which will help the sector. So we've got a piece of work which will be around engagement and indeed advisory to spread good learnings. We may have direct investment in automation from a Crown standpoint, because we know the sector can't necessarily afford to put in the kind of investment that the private sector in the commercial tree space, calling the sort of exotic market, do. But we may have to put some of that investment in to kind of get things rolling with this piece. So we're going to be looking at that first bit there, which is the native seedlings supply chain, really quickly. I want to get a paper up to Cabinet probably March, April next year. So the first step for me there, and what I'm asking of you guys, is to help us in that. And one of the key things we want to do is repeat elements of that 2019 survey to see how much has changed since then in the sector, because we know that a number of people have brought automation into their businesses, and I'm quite keen to understand what that means for capacity in the sector, and then what else might we need to do. So we're going to release a survey around November with the help of Matt and NZPPI and some others. If we can have a good response rate to that, that's incredibly important, because that'll be a very, very important basis of evidence for anything we want to do and invest in. So, if you want government support and help in the sector in some areas, we need to know through that survey. We'll also be running some consultation between now and Christmas, but then post-Christmas there'll be a lot more of that work. So the early discussion will be around specifically this native seedling supply chain. And then sort of post-Christmas, with the survey going out, there'll be more on that sector engagement and the nursery review piece. So those two work streams are up first. The native afforestation research program, perhaps a little bit like the Professor was talking about before, where we're procuring research that'll help the sector and help the industry. So we're getting into that. So that's Emily Telfer. I don't know if you guys know Dr. Emily Telfer, ex-Scion. I think she spent 20 years there or something. She's leading this work stream. Very passionate and smart lady. Dr. Belinda Miller is leading the nursery review and sector engagement piece, based out of Nelson. Again, very, very clever and passionate woman. She's going to be great. And then we've also got the long-term strategy and action plan. So the long-term strategy and action plan is around how do we start to build demand for natives and reduce obstacles. And those obstacles might be regulatory obstacles, they might be tax obstacles, they might be all sorts of things that are just kind of in the system at the moment that stop you from sort of moving forward on things. Someone gave me a good example the other day. They said, look, if I have a kauri tree in my backyard, which I do, and I wanted to cut it down, and I did, the only thing I could use that wood for is firewood at the moment. I thought that was really stunning. Because there's all sorts of prevention around using that wood for other purposes. And again, if we're thinking about things at scale and we're thinking about harvestable wood products at some stage of their life cycle, we need to organise that so we don't have regulatory barriers in the way of natives particularly. And Māori usually, and they want working forests. They don't want just something we sit and try and tie up and say, well, that can't be done. Nothing can be done with that now. So we need to incorporate that and build all that in. We're going to have a special work stream and focus on that, building that piece up around what that will mean, particularly with Māori post-Christmas as well. So that's some of the big work streams that we've got rolling here under the program. Most of them are going to be spread over multi-years, and as I say, we'll learn some stuff, then we're going to have to stop and go, okay, is all this working? Do we need to pivot? Do we need to move? Go for the next tranche, etc., etc. Also, some of the money, this is a detailed thing, I guess, but some of the money is actually not released. It's held in what they call contingencies. You actually have to build a business case that says, this can be released, so that can be then put against those purposes. So there's quite a bit of rigour and methodology. It's not just splashing the cash around. We have to be quite very focused about how it's going to work and come up with good cases for it. One of the things that strikes me, and was actually a conversation with Matt earlier on about this program, is the importance of having good advisory around it. And one of the slides I skipped over really because I was a bit nervous was that sort of integration of approach and bringing people from different parts of the forestry side of things, the commercial forestry side, native forestry side, Māori, etc., etc. We're going to have to really try and bring all this stuff in because there's really good knowledge all over the country in little places, and also make sure we've got good governance over the program so it doesn't sort of start disappearing into something in Wellington. Because you can't plant trees in Wellington. It's going to be around across the motu. So I'm kind of jumping through these a little bit, but I've talked about the key things for us. So this survey and engagement, we hope to have the survey out to you in November. If we can, please hear back from you on that. Again, I just want to emphasise that's super important to us to build an evidence base of what's changed and where we need to apply funding and effort and time. We'll have a look at our options, particularly around the native supply chain, around that December to February piece, and identify a direction March, April, and put that to Cabinet. So that's our first big milestone there. And that's specifically around the seedling supply chain and how that might work and the options that we've considered. So it's a pretty fast-paced thing for a government in terms of the timing, but it's really important for us. We're kind of behind, I think, already, which is not great. We've got a big timetable in terms of meeting those goals, of that much planting, which is required, I think, under international agreements to get ourselves to a level where we're carbon neutral. And my understanding, and it's probably not enough detailed understanding to be fair, is that if we don't make those targets, we're actually up for buying credits from overseas nations. And I'd much rather we invest that money here and we do the job here. And we do it with our natives. There's also going to be exotics planted. It's not my focus, but there will be also quite a bit of planting of exotics. That's already happening, and it's happening at the rates that they're even above the rates that they're expecting on this at the moment. So we've almost got to rebalance things a bit. Okay, look, that's really all I wanted to say. I had a lot more notes and probably a lot more detail, and I might have skipped over a few things, but I know there's probably going to be some Q&A, so I'll keep my powder dry for that. Thank you. Yeah. Oh, sorry, God, I don't know that.
I won't ask you that one. Yeah. The top one?
Yeah, no, really hard questions. I don't know the answer to that. So the ETS stuff I'm linked to, sorry, just quickly. I know there's a hive of work going on in that space at the moment, and there has been some changes in what people were originally thinking, and I think what the ministers were provisionally going to do, which was to take exotics out of long-term carbon for the ETS. However, there's been more discussion on that since, and there has been a desire to have a look at what transitional planting will look like. So that doesn't exactly answer the question, but that's a case where people plant pines first and then cut light holes and sliver them down and put natives in amongst it.
Just with regard to that, I went to the Pamu conference last year, and they do a lot of exotic radiata planting, and it's one of New Zealand's bigger planting farms and things. Have you been in discussions with them at all to have a transition plan out of once they move out of pines radiata?
No, we haven't started our engagement yet, but we will be. Yeah, so there's a number of big players, and again, big scale players. They've also got a Totara pilot going, which is pretty interesting. So we want to try and connect up with those big scale players. Obviously, and again, I talked before about a special focus on Māori in terms of having a lot of whenua that could be the right, if they can get the return off it, jobs, whānau, if we can get some skill bases, moving and employment going. Again, another opportunity. Crown land, probably another opportunity. Council owned land, probably another opportunity. So there's there's places for us to focus big scale stuff. And so we'll be looking at pulling that plan together as part of the program for sure. Yeah.
And next question is, has there been any research on predator-proofing land and letting the forests restore naturally versus planting?
Yeah, absolutely. So that is a big focus. In fact, the first piece of advice was do that first. So do possibly selective planting amongst that, but clear the predators out, get it fenced or get it controlled. We had a really good presentation from a group called ZIP, Zero Invasive Predators. I don't know if you guys have heard of them, but they've cleared, I think, nearly 25,000 hectares of bush down in I was going to say southwestern sort of part of the country. So, now they're going to head over the range where they're going to do it on even a bigger scale. And they had a fantastic program. I was really stunned to see what they're doing to knock predators down and control them. Using natural barriers, a lot of quite technology-focused stuff, and I also saw that similar stuff down at Murahuku recently at the nursery opening there, where the people down at Bluff and Stewart Island are bringing some of that technology off and into those environments. So there's some really good stuff going on there. So regenerative bush is definitely part of the picture, and we're just discussing how we best do that at the moment.
And how important do you think eco-sourcing of seed will be in the upscaling of production, or will the focus be on other methods of propagation?
So eco-sourcing is going to be important, and that's definitely going to be part of our conversations with people as we get across the motu. We know there's some really good reasons to do eco-sourcing, and we know there's also often some really strong reasons for that within Māori communities particularly. So that'll be a real highlight for us in terms of focus. The other part, sorry, was... Oh,
It's gone, but it was...
Yeah, look, the other part of that discussion, though, from, again, fairly early understandings, is the climate's changing really quickly, and we have to be careful that we don't plant stuff where the environment's likely to change quite quickly and where the trees won't have the adaptability. So we may need to have those conversations about bringing trees from some areas that already have those conditions into that environment because of the long life of these trees, and trying to make sure we've got the right kind of resilience in there. So it may make sense in some places, it may not make sense to others. But,
have you considered seed dispersal for the succession plantings of podocarps, etc., to be dispersed once the short-term species have established?
Yes. Yeah,
yes
definitely.
is the answer to that one. Solid yes.
Yeah.
Why?
So most people in this room know a lot more about this than me, but the podocarps need a cover crop to come through and get that early protection. So that's that's definitely in consideration of how that's done. Yeah.
Great. What about Mark wants to know, how does this link to the wood industry transformation plan? Even permanent plantings are only permanent for so long. We need to take a multi-generational view. Yeah,
agree. So working quite closely with the industry transformation plan people at the moment. In fact, we've got a joint paper going in tomorrow to talk about how some of those things fit together. Some of the feedback they've had through the ITP, which is the industry transformation plan, directly is around this program. So it's actually very helpful. And some of the plans have been put forward by people who have listened to them and said, we think we could do this. Again, it's really helpful. So they do link in very closely and we work together. Yeah.
What are the target land areas for native afforestation? Is it voluntary? This is a big significance in regard to nurseries scaling up production.
Yeah, this is so I talked about those sort of big areas earlier. So that the big pamus, crown land, there may be some Māori land that wants to come in if the conditions are right. So they're all an example of the big places. But what I'm also hearing, and again this is very early days, and this is kind of like a longer term discussion, but hill country farmers are getting more worried about where they fit in with things. I was at a meeting just the day before yesterday, I think, and the speaker was an established person who's been through a number of industries, and they're bringing in a new company that takes a very big protein called rubisco which is involved which is the protein that's involved in photosynthesis in green leaves, and extracting that out for human food products. And they believe that, you know, they could feed Sweden with an area of Canterbury. So in terms of that protein market and the way that consumers, and I know it's been talked about earlier today, are changing, is that those consumers are very interested in the planet. So in terms of consumers, and all of us when buying something, right, you normally have an order-winning criteria in your head, and it's sort of like, I buy on this, and then this, and then this. You have 3 or 4 things you look at. So price might be your number one, or it might be quality, or it might be style. It depends on what you're buying, but you normally have a bit of a list when you're comparing things. And what they're seeing through most all of the research, and I think it was mentioned this morning, is those generations of consumers that are coming through where the earth is heading up very quickly in their order-winning criteria. So there is a sense of change over this next, probably 50 years in terms of some of these markets and what that might mean. And again, there may well be, hill country farmers, especially under these recent announcements, who might be considering retiring land and just putting into something and doing that. So it'll be up to people at this stage. It's voluntary, right? It's people's land. I don't know of any plans. I haven't heard of any plans that, coastal farms will be taken out and put into this, for example.
What do you see as a fair time period to present a non-revocable quantity purchase order to a native nursery so they can start their own initial investment?
So this is important to understand. We're unlikely to be coming and giving native nurseries orders for plants. So what I'm trying to say with this program, it's not about that. We're not going to be the order book, and we're probably not going to be the planter. We're the ones who are trying to fix the market settings. So that's a really important question, because this is a really important distinction about what this program is intended to do and what it isn't intended to do. The settings in the native market aren't working to do things at scale. And what we have to try and figure out is how to get it to work so that so that it can kind of move under its own steam with a bit of stimulus. But at this stage, it's not the Crown turning up with an order book saying we'd like to buy 300,000 trees, please. So that's quite different. That's what we're trying to figure out, how we can do that. That's what we kind of did do under 1 billion trees in a way, right?
I feel like this question links into what you just said, but how will expectations be managed so we have time to grow quality trees and time frames needed for growing rather than quickly and poor quality to meet targets?
Yeah, so I think that's
I
probably
was right in
the
thinking
same.
it was a similar question, wasn't it?
And again, I just want to emphasise, and this is why the survey is really important, based on the 2019 data anyway, those tall trees are kind of 4% of what the native nursery sector produces. So it's a really, really small portion, because there's no market. It's not a sale, it's not a market that's really working. 96% of your stuff is the other stuff that is working. So it's kind of like, keep going on that, and we need to help with that and move that, because I'm sure that's going to in some way be part of this other stuff in terms of getting those tall trees up with other crops around it and under it and all the rest of it. So there's sort of there's a watch this space discussion, but at this stage there's no plan for us to turn up and start giving nurseries orders for large quantities of trees.
Will you incentivise typical consumers on a smaller scale too? For example, home planting, farm shade plantings. There's only X amount of land available for increasing population.
Yeah, probably not, would be my sense of it, in terms of small scale isn't what we're doing. So the small scale consumer stuff is, it's a lot of your smaller nursery market. You don't want the Crown interfering with that stuff really. Consumers want to buy natives anyway, and they're planting them, which is great. But what we can help with is demonstrating, technologies, automation, all that kind of stuff, so that you guys get to see it and feel it, and is it something that will help your business, and in some way will help reduce the overall costs and improve the quality is the intent through the science and advisory and other bits that you get to benefit from. So in that way, you deal with the consumers, your current market stays your market kind of thing. Okay, cool. Well, I'm here all day, folks, if there's more to talk about, and tomorrow.
Yeah, I was just wondering if I could ask a question. One of the earlier ones was from me. So what I see is you're in this cyclic wheel spin without any commitment to a nursery to start investing in producing natives. You're never going to get that traction, and that's where 1BT fell over, that everyone talked about it and agreed it was a good idea, but no one would put any skin in the game except for potential growers. And there's lots of other opportunities with exotics or even consumable or ornamentals or whatever. They just have a greater sense of certainty. So is that something that you see?
Yeah, look, the wheel spin worries me, particularly that demand side of the equation. If we can't kind of get those settings right, there's no amount of money that'll fix it in terms of the government. And this, at the end of the day, this is sort of your tax dollars too. So we have to be really careful about how we reallocate, spend and focus. So the intent isn't to set nurseries up with initial big orders, because terrible things happen. And I've been reminded as I've spoken to some nurseries, a lot of the people in the room are survivors from what happened in 2008 and earlier times, where people got reliant on government money coming in, and then it stopped. And you sort of, there's a danger in building a business model on that. It's not to say it never happens, but the intent at this first initial stage is to try and fix those settings and get out of the wheel spin. Because if we can't do that, then just consistently funding and pouring money into it, it's not going to get us anywhere near those targets, is what we learned out of 1BT. So our peak years of planting there, despite the spend, we're way under what we're looking for here. So it's a difficult thing. But what I do want to do, if I can, is really get your ideas and elicit your ideas in terms of how we could move forward, what the settings are that most need changing, where the areas are that you think we should really focus to get this fixed at a system level. That's the bit.
Building Trees program has been axed.
I don't think there's any orders that have got. There's no more. I think so. I'm not aware of any applications coming through or anything like that. I think everyone's just sort of shut it down. Yeah, and that's a danger, right? So all of a sudden, if you're building your nursery on the basis that this government funding continues, and then a new government comes in or something changes in the policy standpoint, you're kind of left with this capacity, and I worry about that, from a business background standpoint. So we've got to try and get this balanced right. But again, there's a lot of wisdom in this room, people that have been here, for the long haul, and will be here in the future. And again, really want to hear from you people in terms of how we can best solve this and what we can do as the Crown in this particular instance. Okay, thank you very much. Thanks,